Hi friends! So this year I decided to challenge myself to read 25 books from my own book collection in the year of 2025, calling it the 25 in 25 challenge. I have a pretty large home library, but honestly there are so many books that I own that I have never read. I decided to give myself a fun challenge and prioritize 25 of those books this year. Of course, I hope to read many more than 25, but I thought that was a good place to start, especially in the year of 2025. I'm also a bit of a mood reader, so I didn't want to plan out all of my reads for the whole year, so 25 is good for me. I'd love for you to join me too, whether you're reading books from your own collection or reading ebooks or audiobooks or books from your public library. Because I'm picking books from my own collection, I decided I would make this challenge even more fun by wrapping all of the books individually with wrapping paper, and then as I read them, I will open one after another until I read them all. So that just adds a little element of surprise, which I really enjoy. You can do this challenge however you'd like, but here's how I decided to split up my books. So to begin, I picked 5 classics or nonfiction, 5 adult fantasy or sci-fi, 5 middle grade, and 5 miscellaneous, so those can be whatever genre, including graphic novels or comics. Again, you can split those up however you'd like. I just chose some genres that I enjoy and that I want to prioritize this year. That all being said, I'm going to dive into the books that I chose for this challenge, and it's probably going to be a bit lengthy because I have a lot and I am not very concise. So grab yourself a drink of your choice and cozy on up, and we'll get into the books. Also, if you decide to take on this challenge, I'd love for you to tell me in the comments, or if you have another reading goal for this year, I'd also love to hear about that. So before I start talking about those books, I do want to note that a lot of these are going to be older books that I've had on my shelf for quite a while. That's kind of the point of this challenge, is reading books that I've wanted to prioritize and just haven't for whatever reason. So let's go ahead and get started with the first 5 books. Those are going to be nonfiction and classics. The first book I chose for this challenge is a Christian nonfiction book called Missional Motherhood. For a long time, I felt that motherhood is part of my purpose in life, and now that I'm a foster parent, I thought it was a good time to pick this up. I think this will be a great read to help me kind of refocus on what it means to be a parent, to help me focus on the grander purpose of motherhood, and to help me be intentional in my relationship with my girls, beyond just changing diapers and giving them food. The next book on my list is called Home Sweet Maison, The French Art of Making a Home. I read quite a few nonfiction books related to home design and just making a home last year, and I really enjoyed them. And since I went to Paris a few years ago, I've just been really interested in more of the European lifestyle and European homes. I didn't get a real taste in Paris for what France is like as a whole. I know Paris is kind of a unique place within France, but I thought this book would be a good glimpse into French life. Now onto my classics. I picked 3 classics, and I hope to read a lot more throughout the year. I have a few others that I want to prioritize this year, but these are the few that I picked specifically for this challenge. The first one is Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. I read And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie a few years ago, and I really loved it, and I have been wanting to pick up another of her books. I have seen all of the Kenneth Branagh adaptations for her Poirot books, but I haven't read any of them, so I decided to pick this one up. It's also been a while since I've seen those movies, so I think that the books will still hold a lot of intrigue for me. And also, going on a Nile River cruise is on my bucket list of things that I want to do before I die, so I know I'm gonna love this one. I decided to pull my curtain, so the lighting is not quite as good, but hopefully a little more consistent. So anyway, the next book on my list is The Great Gatsby, and yes, I know, how have I never read this book? It's one of my best friend's favorite books. She teaches it every year in her class, and I love the Leonardo DiCaprio movie. I just haven't read the book, and I'm eager to see how it holds up. I know it's a classic for a reason. So yeah, I'm finally making it a priority in this book challenge. Finally, I'm including Peter Pan on my list. I've always loved this story, but I've never actually read the novel. I've seen multiple movie adaptations, including Finding Neverland, which is a wonderful movie about Barry's journey to writing this book. And I think it's time that I finally read it. I expect to completely fall in love with the story even more than I already do. Next, we're going to get into my 5 choices for adult sci-fi and fantasy. And this one was really hard to narrow down. There are a lot that I really want to read, but I feel really good about these choices. My first book is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. Now, I think somebody described this to me as a better Twilight, but witchy and set in Oxford. And honestly, like, say no more. I'm already in. I haven't watched the show, so I'm mostly going into this blind, but I'm very excited for the dark academia vibes that I know this book is going to deliver on. And since I was able to visit Oxford a few years ago, I think that I'm really going to be able to envision everything and really immerse myself in the story. So definitely excited to try this one out. The next book on my list is, yes, Fourth Wing. I tried picking this up a while ago, and I had a hard time reading it physically because something about the writing just wasn't working for me. I was being super critical about it, and I just wasn't enjoying myself. So I then tried the dramatized audio, and I did make it a little bit further in that, and I was starting to get interested in the story, but for some reason I stopped reading it and moved on to a different book. So I really want to try it again because I know it's loved by so many people. I'll probably do the audio again, but yeah, I'm putting this in the challenge so that I finally prioritize it. The next book on my list is a sci-fi, and it is called Annie-Bot. This was a book of the month choice a while back, and I was really intrigued by the premise. It reminded me of the movie Her by Joaquin Phoenix, which I highly recommend. It's a very, very good film. I'm not a huge sci-fi reader, but I am intrigued with AI related stuff. I think it's both scary and really fascinating. But this is about a robot with AI who is supposed to be like the perfect girlfriend. And then I believe she starts to gain some more independence and starts to feel like, oh, maybe I'm being taken advantage of, and things kind of go off the rails. So I think this is going to be a really fun and interesting read. And I think it's very important to consider the pros and cons of how AI is developing. The next book is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. V.E. Schwab is one of my favorite authors, not just because I love her stories, but because she also just gives so much to the writing community, the writing world. I love her author talks that I've seen. I've also really enjoyed her podcast and her newsletter. So just as a person, I really like her, and I enjoy everything she puts out into the world. So I have not read all of her books, but I've read quite a few, and I know this is a favorite of a lot of people. This is Vicious. I don't know if I said the title. It is part of a duology, but she's also writing another book within this world. It's about 2 college roommates who start experimenting and looking into what it takes to gain extraordinary powers, sort of X-Men-y, and they realize that like near-death experiences can give someone extraordinary powers. So they, I think, gain powers, and they have a fallout. I think one ends up in prison maybe, but ultimately they end up kind of as arch enemies, and they have like their own teams, I think, of people. I think one wants to destroy everyone with superpowers, and the other one wants to like strengthen the people with superpowers. I don't know. It just sounds like a really fun adventure, and I believe that it's full of morally gray characters and just explores a lot of good questions. So definitely excited to check this out. I'm sure that I'm going to love it. All right, the last book in this category is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I've heard that this book is incredible. It won the Hugo Award in 2016 for Best Novel, and I just have really high expectations. I have heard that it's a bit hard to get through at times, but that it's worth it and has really good payoff. It's just very masterfully told. This is an apocalyptic story about a woman who is trying to save her daughter who has been kidnapped. So she's on this journey through a world that's just collapsing around her. People are fighting for resources. Countries are at war trying to survive. And I'm hoping that she'll meet some other characters that will help her on this journey and that it will be a really interesting adventure. I know there's a lot more to it than that, but that's what I know so far. The only thing I'm potentially worried about is that it might be a solo journey. I'm hoping that it's not. I'm hoping that she meets other characters who help her along the way. But personally, I'm not a big fan of stories where a hero or the main character is on some kind of journey on their own and it takes a really long time. I like something with more dialogue and interaction between characters. So we'll see. Because it's gotten so many good reviews, I hope that I will really enjoy it. So let's go ahead and move on to my 5 young adult picks. The first book on my list is Legend Board by Tracy Dion. This book was so hyped up when it first came out, and it's been on my shelf and on my reading list for a really long time. It's about a girl who discovers that she has magical abilities after she witnesses a demon attack on a campus for a high school residential program. She learns about this secret society of people who I think are supposed to be like descendants of the Knights of the Round Table, and she decides that she's going to try to infiltrate this group in order to hopefully learn more about her mother's mysterious disappearance. I love an academic setting. I love the King Arthur connection, and I love magical and secret societies, so everything sounds right up my alley. I'm finally gonna give this one a go this year. The next book on my list is Inkheart. I have a friend who's been trying to get me to read this book for years, and I've wanted to. I think it's gonna be one that I love. It's just been on the back burner. As someone who obviously loves books and believes in the power of stories, I can't imagine that I wouldn't love this one. I saw the film ages ago, like probably within the first few years that it came out, but I honestly remember very little about the actual story besides the main premise, which is that there's, I think, like a father and a daughter, and when they read out of this book, the story comes to life into the real world. This sounds really fun, and I'm excited to finally get to it in 2025. The next book on my list is a contemporary. It's Black Enough by a number of Black authors, edited by E.B. Zaboy. This is a collection of stories by Black authors on what it means to be young and Black in America. I'm not a huge short story fan, and I usually struggle to get through a collection like this, but I did want to challenge myself to read this one this year. I think it will expand my awareness of others' experiences, which is one of the primary reasons that I read in the first place. I think it's important to continually push yourself outside of your comfort zone, to push yourself to grow and learn about experiences that are different than yours, because that builds your compassion, that builds your understanding and your openness. And in the case of this book, your anti-racism. So as someone who is not Black, I'm excited to read this and expand my worldview. The next book I'm planning to read for this challenge is We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. This is a book that I honestly know very little about, but I've heard that it's absolutely wild. All I know is that it's incredibly suspenseful and it involves a group of people on an island. I honestly love a whodunit with a secluded location and a closed cast of characters, so I'm sure that this will be a really fun one, and we'll see if it's worth the hype. The last young adult book that I picked is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. This is another book that's been on my list for ages, and everything I've heard about it makes me certain that I'm going to love it. This is a contemporary story about a girl who is in her freshman year of college, and she's coming to terms with her new reality. She's also a fan fiction author for a series called Simon Snow, or about the character Simon Snow, which is supposed to be kind of a Harry Potter spoof. And she uses these stories in her fan fiction to find comfort and to escape. I believe that she also has a romance of her own in her actual reality. And I've just heard this is a really fantastic coming of age story. And as a fantasy lover and Harry Potter lover, I'm sure I'll enjoy those aspects of the story too. All right, we're over halfway through. How are you doing? I'm doing okay. I'm making it. I could honestly talk about books forever and ever, so here we go. Let's dive into my next 5 books, which are my middle grade reads. Okay, my first middle grade read is On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness by Andrew Peterson. My friend recommended this series to me a while back because she knows that I enjoy middle grade fantasy, and I think it's super popular among those who have read the series. This is the first book in the Wingfeather saga, and Andrew Peterson is a really interesting guy. I've kind of been following him for a while. He's a Christian artist and musician down in the Nashville area, also a writer, obviously, but he created this community of artists down in Nashville called the Rabbit Room. Highly recommend checking it out. It's just really cool what they're doing down there. But anyway, this is an adventure story about a boy and his siblings who are traveling to new places, trying to uncover secrets and fight against the oppressing evil around them. It sounds really whimsical and full of deeper meaning, kind of what I would expect from a guy like Andrew Peterson. So I think it's supposed to be kind of reminiscent of some older classic novels that have kind of a deeper moral meaning too. So I'm sure that I'm really going to like this. I can't remember how many books are in this series, but yeah, I'm excited to get started. So that's book number 1. The next book on my list is Greenwild by Pari Thompson. This is actually one of the newer books on my list. This came out in 2023, but this is a portal fantasy about a girl who knows that her mother is keeping secrets from her. One day her mother disappears and she sets off to try to find her, but fleeing from an adversary, she goes through this door into a magical world called Greenwild, and here she'll partner with some new friends with strange abilities and discover secrets about herself and her mother's disappearance. This is a story with green magic, or like plant nature magic, and it honestly just sounds like a dream. I'm really looking forward to diving into this one, and hopefully I can read it in like spring or summer because I think that's when I'll most enjoy it. Next, we have a book from the Pages & Co. series, Tilly and the Book Wanderers. This is by Anna James. I honestly don't know why I've waited so long to read this book because it sounds right up my alley. This book has kind of a similar premise to the last one, where the main character goes on an adventure to try to discover more about her mother's whereabouts. However, in this story, the main character is a reader, and while she's wandering her grandparents' bookshop, she discovers that she has a magical ability called book wandering. That is, to travel between books and the real world. She partners with Anne of Green Gables and Alice from Wonderland on this adventure to kind of solve the mystery of her mother's disappearance. I'm obsessed with Anne of Green Gables, and I will say I didn't love Alice in Wonderland as a book, but I really like the whimsy of that story, so I just know that I am going to absolutely love this, and I'm glad to finally prioritize it this year. Next, we have Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine. Levine? I'm sorry if I said it wrong. I saw the film adaptation when I was a kid, and of course my friends and I were all absolutely obsessed with it. Anne Hathaway is phenomenal, but it's been years since I've seen it, and recently my friend was telling me how much she loves this book, and I was like, oh well, maybe it's finally time that I read it. If you aren't aware of this book, it's won a Newbery Honor, and it's about a girl who at her birth is given a gift by a fairy of obedience. Basically, as she grows up, she has to be obedient to everything that is asked of her. And you can imagine how that works out with some stepsisters that don't like her very much. Well, one day she finally gets fed up and she decides that she's going to go on a journey to break this curse or get rid of this gift. It's a magical story full of ogres and princes and giants, and I honestly think it's going to be so magical and funny and heartwarming. I'm really excited to dive into this one whenever it is that I get to it. Okay, the final book in the middle grade category that I chose is Lilani of the Distant Sea. This is by Erin Entrada Kelly. This book I've heard really good things about. It's a story inspired by Filipino folklore, and personally I love hearing about other cultures' myths and legends, so I'm really intrigued about that. It's about a girl who makes an unfortunate wish and puts her village in danger, and so she decides that she is going to go on this dangerous journey across the sea to try to find fortune and save her people. The story sounds full of adventure and magic, and I hope that it lives up to the hype. Alright, we are on to the last 5 books of this challenge. So these are miscellaneous books, and I could choose any genre that I wanted. So I kind of went with a hodgepodge of things that I feel like I want to read this year. The first book I chose is Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. I believe this is actually a young adult book, but it is a historical fiction. I don't read a lot of historical fiction, but I'm usually really satisfied by my reading experience when I have read them. I need to pick them up more. I'm just not as naturally drawn to them. This one has a really interesting premise though, and I've just heard really amazing things about this author, so I'm really looking forward to giving this a try. This book is set in 1945, and it is about the sinking of a German cruise liner that was hit by a Soviet submarine. The ship was carrying more than 9,000 people, including 5,000 children. I know a lot about like the Titanic, but I honestly knew nothing about this. And this novelization tells this story from 4 different perspectives. So I'm kind of expecting that I'm going to need a lot of tissues because obviously it's a very tragic event, and I'm sure that there are going to be some perspectives that are more heartbreaking than others. But I also think it's just going to be really interesting and, of course, heartbreaking. So definitely looking forward to this one. That might sound weird because it's probably going to be really sad, but I think it is going to be interesting. The next miscellaneous title that I chose is My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Frederick Bachman. A while back, I read A Man Called Uva by this author, and I absolutely loved it. I've said many times that I think it's one of the best books that I've ever read. It really moved me, and I think that the characterization is some of the best that I've ever seen. I don't know if I've ever cried as much reading a book as I did reading A Man Called Uva. I tried reading Beartown by this author and wasn't really connecting with it. Maybe I'll try it again someday, but I believe that this is more in the same vein as the Uva story. So I think I'll probably enjoy this one. This is about a 7-year-old girl who is best friends with her grandmother, which already, has my heart. After her grandmother dies, this little girl learns that her grandmother has left her with a mission. She's left her a number of apology letters to people that she has wronged, and she wants her granddaughter to hand deliver all of these. It just sounds like a wild adventure, and I expect this to be funny and entertaining and also very heartwarming and potentially heartbreaking too. So I think this is just going to be a beautiful book, and I have very high hopes for it. The next book I've chosen is a thriller or mystery. This is The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I've been wanting to read another Ruth Ware book ever since I read and absolutely loved The Death of Mrs. Westaway years ago, so I'm finally prioritizing it. I decided to try this one because I know that it's one of her more popular titles, but honestly, I know nothing about this story, and that's kind of how I want it to be. I want to go in completely blind and just let myself enjoy the ride. So, Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. Excited to read it. All right, 2 more to go. Next book I chose is The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. I hope I said that right. This is described as a supernatural suspense story set in the aftermath of the Mexican War for Independence. And the premise of this is very similar to Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, if you're familiar with that. I haven't read that book, but I'm familiar with the plot line because of a film adaptation and other reading that I've done. Maybe I'll eventually get to it. But anyway, this is a story of a woman who marries a widower whose wife died tragically and mysteriously, and she's hoping to find a sense of independence and security, having her own home, having her own life again, and she believes that she's going to find that with this man. So she moves on to this beautiful grand estate, and things start to kind of unravel. She starts learning about some secrets, and things are a little bit more horrific than they seemed at first glance. This one sounds a bit spooky and really atmospheric, so hopefully I'll read this one in the fall because that's kind of when I'm in the mood for more spooky horror stuff. All right, last book. The last book I chose is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I wanted to include a contemporary romance, and I know Abby Jimenez is super popular within the genre. I've only read her short story, The Worst Wingman Ever, which was in an Amazon novella collection that came out, I think, Valentine's Day of last year. I did enjoy that, and as I said earlier, I'm not a huge short story person, so I'm excited to actually read a full-length novel by this author. The title is very telling, as this does sound a bit like The Little Mermaid. Our female main character is a big city doctor who comes from this wealthy family, and she starts to fall for a small town carpenter. This kind of sounds like a Hallmark movie, and honestly, I'm here for it. So yeah, that's the last book in my 25 of 25 challenge. All right, and that concludes my list of 25 books that I want to read in 2025. Let me know if you plan to do this challenge or if you have any other reading goals for the year down in the comments. Also, I'd love to know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, if you would personally recommend any of them. I'd love to hear all about that down below. Thanks.